My name is Lydia Coleman. I'm 32, and I never imagined that being a successful architect in Chicago would cost me my family. Last Thanksgiving, I drove 3 hours to my parents' house in suburban Michigan. I had a homemade apple pie on the seat beside me and hope in my heart. But when they opened the door, my smile froze. "You are not invited, Lydia." My father's voice was cold. "Go home." Behind him, I saw my sister Heather, Uncle Pete, and even Emma, my best friend. Since college, laughing at the table. I nodded, went back to my car, and made one quick phone call. 20 minutes later, my phone blew up with notifications, and the screaming began. "If you're watching this, tell me in the comments where you're from. Don't forget to subscribe so you can follow my journey of betrayal and unexpected redemption." That changed my life. Growing up in Westfield, Michigan, my family was my whole world. We were the Colemans, the kind of family others admired. Dad was a respected dentist, Mom owned a boutique, Heather followed Dad into medicine, and I chose architecture. Sundays meant family dinners, holidays were huge, and loyalty to each. Other was expected without question. My relationship with my parents was loving but complicated. They were proud of me, but often reminded me that architecture wasn't as practical as Heather's career as a pediatrician. Still, we stayed close. We called weekly, visited monthly, and shared our lives. Everything changed 2 years ago when my grandmother Dorothy passed away. She had been my biggest supporter, the one who bought me my first drafting table at 12, and encouraged me when my parents pushed me toward medicine or law. We shared a bond everyone in the family knew about. When she died at 93, her will shocked everyone. She left me the lakeside cottage instead of splitting it equally. The cottage, worth nearly $800,000, had been in our family for generations and held countless memories. She wanted you to have it because you truly appreciated its history and design. The lawyer explained Heather didn't take it well. "You manipulated her," she told me angrily over coffee. "You spent years getting close just to take it." I was crushed. That's not true. Grandma and I were close because of shared interests. We never talked about inheritance. She didn't believe me. What started as hurt feelings turned into bitterness. Heather told relatives I had taken advantage of Grandma, first in whispers, then openly. My parents stayed neutral at first. "You girls need to work this out," Mom said. But over time, they leaned toward Heather. "Your grandmother might not have been thinking clearly toward the end." Mom suggested 6 months later, "Maybe you should sell the cottage and share the money." I tried to compromise. "You can all visit any time. Nothing has to change but the name on the deed." But Heather wanted money, nothing less. With student debt weighing her down, she felt entitled to her share. My best friend, Emma, made things worse. She and I had been inseparable since college, and she always had my back. "Your grandma had every right to choose," she told me. "Heather will come around." But Emma was also close to Heather. They volunteered together on medical trips. Slowly, she pulled away from me. She canceled plans, delayed texts, and finally said, "You should understand Heather's side more. Family wealth should be shared." "This isn't about money," I said. "Grandma wanted me to protect the cottage. Heather would sell it to developers tomorrow." My last ally was Uncle Pete, my dad's brother and a fellow architect who inspired my career. He reassured me, "Your grandmother knew what she was doing. Stand your ground." That made it even more painful to see him at the Thanksgiving table. Still, I tried to fix things. I sent thoughtful gifts, kept calling, even suggested family counseling. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, Mom called. "Dinner's at 2 o'clock. Bring your cranberry apple pie." Her voice sounded warm, and I thought it was a peace offering. The last time we'd all been together was Dad's 65th birthday in August. The tension was obvious. Heather barely spoke to me, using others to pass messages. My parents stayed quiet. I left early, exhausted by the fake politeness. Looking back, I should have seen the signs, the missed calls, the side conversations, the gradual exclusion. But I wanted to believe family bonds were unbreakable. Thanksgiving morning, I drove from Chicago with cautious optimism. The sky was clear, the roads were empty, Christmas music played softly, and I dared to hope the holiday spirit would heal us. I baked Grandma's cranberry apple pie the night before, following her recipe exactly. It gave me comfort, reminding me of happier times. I also picked gifts for everyone, a vintage medical book for Heather, golf items for Dad, bath products for Mom, coffee for Uncle Pete, and a journal for Emma. Westfield looked like a holiday postcard that day, streets lined with wreaths and lights. My parents' Victorian home came into view at 1:30. I parked, checked myself in the mirror, and carried the pie and gifts. The yard looked the same as always, with Mom's decorations and Dad's perfect lawn. For a moment, the familiarity gave me courage. "This is going to be fine," I whispered as I walked up to the front door. "It is Thanksgiving. Family comes first today." The porch steps creaked in that familiar way I had known since childhood. Through the beveled glass of the front door, I could see movement inside, people gathering in the foyer and dining room beyond. I balanced the pie in one hand, gifts in the other, and pressed the doorbell with my elbow. My heart pounded during the 10 seconds it took for the door to open. When it did, my father stood there dressed in his traditional Thanksgiving sweater and slacks. My mother appeared behind him, her expression unreadable. "Happy Thanksgiving." I began with genuine warmth, holding up the pie. I made Grandma's recipe. The silence that followed lasted only seconds, but felt eternal. My father did not move from the doorway, did not reach for the pie, did not return my greeting. My mother's hand came to rest on his shoulder, a gesture of solidarity that excluded me. "Lydia," my father finally said, his voice lower and colder than I had ever heard it. "You are not invited. Please go home." The words did not register immediately. I stood there smiling stupidly, waiting for the punchline to a joke I did not understand. "I do not understand," I said, still extending the pie toward them. "Mom told me 2 o'clock dinner." "Same as always." "That was before we knew what you did, my mother," replied her voice, trembling slightly with what I realized was not sadness but anger. "Heather told us everything." "How could you, Lydia? Your own family? What are you talking about? What did I supposedly do?" I asked, genuine confusion mixing with dawning horror. Neither answered. Instead, my father shifted slightly, and the movement allowed me to see past them into the dining room. The table was set beautifully with the family china and crystal centerpiece of autumn flowers, perfectly arranged. Around it sat my sister, Heather, Uncle Pete, my Aunt Barbara, 2 cousins, and Emma. They had glasses of wine in hand, laughing at something I could not hear. The betrayal of seeing Emma there hit hardest. She must have noticed my arrival because she glanced toward the door, made brief eye contact with me, then quickly looked away, leaning to whisper something to Heather. My sister turned, saw me, and smirked before returning to her conversation. Uncle Pete, my last ally, seemed to hesitate when he noticed me. For a moment, I thought he might stand up, might come to the door and intervene. Instead, he looked down at his wine glass, swirled the liquid inside, and remained seated. The silence at the door stretched uncomfortably. Neighbors walking their dog across the street slowed to observe the obvious confrontation occurring on the Coleman family porch. The pie felt heavy in my hands, the gifts suddenly ridiculous. "At least tell me what I am accused of," I said, finally struggling to keep my voice steady. Heather found the letters my father said cryptically. "We know you manipulated Grandma. Dorothy, we know you threatened to put her in a home if she did not change her will. We have proof, Lydia. The accusation was so outlandish, so completely fabricated that I almost laughed. That never happened. I would never do that. Who told you this? We have seen the evidence, my mother said firmly. Please respect our wishes. And leave. This is hard enough already. In that moment, a lifetime of family dynamics crystallized with perfect clarity. My parents had always believed Heather first, had always given her the benefit of any doubt. My word against hers had never been a fair contest. I could have argued, could have demanded to see these alleged letters, could have created a scene the neighbors would discuss for months. Instead, something inside me went very still and quiet. A dignity I did not know I possessed straightened my spine. I understand, I said simply, though I did not. Not really. I carefully placed the pie and gifts on the porch swing. Without another word, I turned and walked back down the steps, feeling their eyes on my back. The walk to my car seemed to take hours, each step requiring tremendous effort. I did not look back as I started the engine and pulled away from the curb, from the house, from the family that had just excised me like a tumor. I drove aimlessly through Westfield for 20 minutes, passing familiar landmarks from my childhood with new eyes. The elementary school where I had won the 5th grade science fair. The ice cream shop where Dad used to take us after softball games. The public library where Mom had first introduced me to books about architecture. Places that had shaped me, now colored by the knowledge that the people who had shared those memories with me had chosen to believe I was capable of elder abuse and manipulation. Eventually, I found myself parking at Riverside Park, a quiet spot along the Westfield River where I had often come as a teenager to think. The playground was empty. Families gathered in their homes or on Thanksgiving tables. I sat on a bench, overlooking the water, my body physically present, but my mind replaying the scene at the door in endless torturous loops. Previous Thanksgivings flickered through my memory. Last year, before the inheritance situation had fully escalated, we had still managed a civil dinner. 2 years ago, Grandma Dorothy had been with us complimenting my architectural sketches for a new project. 5 years ago, I had brought my then-boyfriend James home to meet everyone, and we had all played charades after dinner until midnight. 10 years ago in college, Emma and I had both come home from University of Michigan, staying up late in my childhood bedroom, sharing secrets and dreams. The progression of memories highlighted what I had lost, not just today, but gradually over months. The rejection at the door was merely the final act in a slow disintegration of what I had thought was an unbreakable family bond. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Your sister explained everything. I cannot believe you would do that to your grandmother. I thought I knew you. I turned off the phone without responding. The hurt was too raw to formulate words that would not become regrets later. The initial shock began giving way to waves of emotion. Hurt came first, a physical ache in my chest that made breathing difficult. Disbelief followed my mind, struggling to reconcile the family I thought I had with the people who had just turned me away. Anger arrived next, hot and clarifying, burning away the fog of confusion. What kind of family believes such horrible accusations without even asking from my side? I said aloud to the empty park. What kind of friend accepts those accusations without question? The anger felt good, energizing, but I knew it was not a sustainable fuel. Beneath it lay deeper questions about identity and belonging. Who was I? Outside the role of daughter, sister, granddaughter, friend. What did family even mean if it could be conditionally withdrawn? I started my car again and drove to the edge of town where Lakeview Drive curved around the northern shore of Blue Lake. At the end of a private road stood Grandma Dorothy's cottage, now my cottage, the center of all this conflict. I had not visited since inheriting it, partly out of respect for family feelings, and partly because I had been genuinely busy with a major project at my architecture firm. The small Tudor revival sat exactly as Grandma had left it, its distinctive steep gables and decorative half-timbering just as charming as I remembered. I used my key to enter, breathing in the familiar scent of old books and the lavender sachets Grandma had placed in every drawer. Inside, covered furniture created ghostly shapes in the dim light. I pulled back dust covers to reveal the handcrafted oak dining table where we had played cards during summer visits. The reading chair by the stone fireplace where Grandma had taught me to knit the writing desk where she had penned actual letters until the end of her life. Letters my father had mentioned. Letters alleged evidence of my manipulation. But Grandma and I had never exchanged letters. We had called regularly and visited in person. Our communication existed in shared experiences, not written words. Whatever evidence Heather claimed to have found was fabricated. Standing in the silent cottage, surrounded by my grandmother's carefully preserved possessions and memories, clarity began to emerge. I was being punished not for anything I had done, but for being loved by my grandmother in a way my sister resented. The cottage represented Grandma's acknowledgement of our special connection, and that was the real crime in my family's eyes. My options crystallized as I sat in Grandma's reading chair. I could continue trying to explain and defend myself against fabricated accusations, essentially begging for a place at a table where I was clearly unwelcome. I could sell the cottage, divide the money as Heather wanted, and hope that financial capitulation would restore my family's status. Or I could accept that the family I thought I had did not exist in the form I had believed and begin making choices based on that painful reality. The last option felt both terrifying and liberating. If family love was conditional on compliance with Heather's demands, was it really love at all? Did I want to spend my life earning back approval that should have been freely given? I remembered a conversation with Gregory Patterson, a college friend who had become a family law attorney. We had reconnected at a University of Michigan alumni event last year, and I had mentioned the inheritance situation casually. His response had struck me as odd at the time. "If things ever get really bad with your family over this, call me," he had said, handing me his business card. "There are aspects to your grandmother's estate planning you might not be aware of." I had tucked the card away, not thinking much of it. Now, sitting in the cottage at the center of all this pain, I retrieved his number from my contacts and made the call that would change everything. "Gregory, it is Lydia Coleman. Remember that family situation I mentioned last year? It just got really bad and I think I need your help." Gregory answered on the second ring. "Lydia, good to hear from you. Happy Thanksgiving." "Not particularly happy," I replied, explaining the scene at my parents' door. He listened without interrupting, then said something unexpected. "I was afraid something like this might happen. Your grandmother anticipated potential conflict over her decisions." "What do you mean?" I asked, confused. "Did you know my grandmother?" "I worked with her attorney on some aspects of her estate planning," Gregory explained. "She was very specific about her wishes and concerned about possible family discord. She left instructions and documentation with me to be shared only if necessary." I sat down heavily in Grandma's reading chair. "What kind of documentation?" "First, there are videos of your grandmother explaining her decisions in her own words, recorded 6 months before her passing when she was demonstrably of sound mind. Second, there are notarized statements addressing specific concerns she anticipated, including the possibility that you might be accused of manipulation. The realization that Grandma had foreseen this scenario and prepared for it brought tears to my eyes. She had known her own daughter and younger granddaughter better than I had. "There is more," Gregory continued. "Your grandmother established a secondary trust with specific conditions. She left assets beyond the cottage that your family is not aware of. Those assets were to be distributed among family members, including Your sister, contingent upon their respect for her primary wishes regarding the cottage. What are you saying? I asked, trying to process this information. I am saying that by contesting your inheritance of the cottage so aggressively, your sister and parents may have violated the terms of the secondary trust. They have potentially forfeited substantial benefits that would have come to them over time. The irony was almost too much. Heather's greed and determination to claim what she saw as her share of the cottage had potentially cost her much more. What do you think I should do with this information? I asked. Gregory was quiet for a moment. That depends on what you want. Lydia, do you want reconciliation with your family, or do you want them to face the consequences of their actions? It was a question I had never considered. I had been so focused on defending myself and maintaining relationships that I had not stopped to ask what justice might look like in this situation. I want the truth to be known, I said finally. I want them to understand what they have done, not just to me, but to themselves. And I want to honor Grandma's wishes without feeling guilty for doing so. Then I suggest a targeted approach. Gregory said, I can send the video of your grandmother and copies of relevant documents to specific family members. Not just your parents and sister, but also your uncle, aunts, and cousins who may have been influenced by false narratives. The wider family should know the truth. We spent the next 15 minutes developing a strategy. Gregory would email materials to extended family members first, then to my parents and sister 30 minutes later. This would give others time to digest the information before my immediate family began damage control. Are you sure you want to do this today? Gregory asked as we finalized details. It is Thanksgiving after all. They made their choice about how to spend Thanksgiving. I replied, a newfound firmness in my voice. Now I am making mine. After ending the call with Gregory, I locked up the cottage and drove into town. Most restaurants were closed for the holiday, but the Silver Spoon, a small diner near the town square, had a sign advertising Thanksgiving meals for those away from home. I parked and went inside, finding the diner about half full with an eclectic mix of people, truck drivers, passing through elderly individuals dining alone. A young couple with backpacks who appeared to be traveling. The hostess, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and silver hair, seated me at a small table, all alone on Thanksgiving, dear. It appears so, I replied with a small smile. Well, not anymore. She said warmly, we are all family here today. I ordered the turkey dinner special and sat, quietly watching the diverse collection of strangers interact with surprising warmth. An elderly man bought dessert for a young mother and her child at a neighboring table. Two truck drivers who had apparently just met were sharing stories and laughter like old friends. The young backpacking couple offered to take a photo of a solo elderly woman so she could send it to her children. The contrast between this gathering of strangers and my own family's rejection was stark and instructive. These people shared no blood, no history, no obligation to each other, yet showed more genuine kindness than those who claimed to love me. My phone remained off as I ate my meal, allowing myself this peaceful interlude before whatever storm would follow Gregor's actions. The turkey was not as good as my mother's. The stuffing came from a box rather than homemade, but somehow it tasted better than any Thanksgiving meal I could remember. I turned my phone back on as I finished my pumpkin pie. No notifications appeared immediately, and I wondered if Gregory had delayed his plan. Then at precisely 4:15 in the afternoon, my screen began lighting up with incoming messages, calls, and voicemails. Just as I had described in the beginning of my story, 20 minutes after that fateful call to Gregory, my phone exploded with activity. The avalanche had begun. The first notification was a text from Emma Lydia. Please call me. I made a terrible mistake. The video from your grandmother. I had no idea. I am so sorry. Before I could process this, a voicemail notification appeared from my mother. Her message, when I played it, was breathless and frantic. "Lydia, what have you done? Call me back immediately. This is not the way to handle family disagreements. We need to talk." Next came a series of increasingly angry texts from Heather. "How dare you ambush the family like this? Those videos could have been manipulated. You are tearing this family apart for money. Mom is crying because of you." I scrolled through more notifications, finding a message from Uncle Pete that stood out. "From the others, I should have stood up for you today. What happened at dinner after you left? I have never seen such chaos. Your grandmother would be proud of you for standing your ground. Can we talk tomorrow? I owe you a proper apology." Through these messages and others that followed, I pieced together what had happened after Gregory sent out his materials. According to Uncle Pete's detailed follow-up message, extended family members had received emails first containing video clips of Grandma Dorothy, clearly stating her wishes regarding the cottage and explaining her reasoning. Lydia is the only one who truly appreciates the architectural and historical significance of this place. She has promised to preserve it rather than sell to developers who would demolish it for lakefront condominiums. This decision is not about financial favoritism, but about preservation of family history. The videos also address potential accusations directly. If anyone suggests Lydia manipulated me or threatened me in any way, know that this is absolutely false. I am making these decisions of sound mind and with full understanding of potential family discord. My hope is that my family will respect my wishes, but I have lived long enough to know that money can bring out the worst in people we love. 30 minutes after these went to extended family, Gregory had sent more comprehensive materials to my parents and Heather, including the details of the secondary trust that they had now violated through their actions. This second trust, previously unknown to anyone but Grandma's lawyers, and Gregory had contained nearly $1 million in investments in property designated to be distributed among family members over time, with significant portions earmarked for Heather's medical practice and my parents' retirement. The conditions had included specific language about respecting the primary bequest of the cottage without contest or harassment of the beneficiary. Me by fabricating evidence to turn family against me and attempting to force me to surrender the cottage. Heather had violated these terms. My parents, by supporting her efforts without verification of facts, had similarly breached the conditions. According to the trust's terms, these violations meant the secondary assets would now be redirected to several charities Grandma had designated as contingent beneficiaries, including the Historical Preservation Society that had always wanted to designate the cottage as a heritage site. As I sat in the diner processing this information, more messages arrived from cousins, aunts, and uncles expressing shock at what had transpired and offering support. Several mentioned they had tried calling my parents' house but received no answer. Emma called 3 times in succession. On the 3rd attempt, I finally answered. "Lydia, please." She began, her voice thick with tears. "I did not know about the fake letters. Heather told me you had been financially abusing your grandmother for years, getting her to change accounts, taking advantage of her dementia. She showed me a note that looked like it was from your grandmother's doctor, confirming cognitive decline before the will change. And you believed that without asking me?" I said, my voice steady despite the hurt. 10 years of friendship, and you did not think to say, "Hey Lydia, your sister is accusing you of elder abuse. What is your side?" "I know," she whispered. "There is no excuse." I told myself I was being loyal to both of you by not bringing it up, not getting in the middle. But that was cowardice, not loyalty. What happened after the emails arrived? I asked, changing the subject because I was not ready to address her betrayal. "Complete chaos," Emma replied. We were just finishing the main course when people's phones started pinging with notifications. Your Uncle Pete checked his email first and just said, "Oh my God," really loudly. Then your cousin Taylor started saying something about videos from Grandma Dorothy. Heather grabbed her phone and went completely white. Emma described how my sister had rushed from the table to the kitchen, my parents following in confusion. Ray's voices had emerged, with Heather insisting the videos must be fake, while my mother demanded explanations about the letters Heather had supposedly found. Your father started yelling about losing their retirement, Emma continued. People started taking sides. Your Aunt Barbara called Heather some names I cannot repeat. Uncle Pete just sat there with his head in his hands, saying he should have known better. I slipped out during the argument. It was still going when I left. I felt a complex mixture of vindication and sadness. The truth was out, but at tremendous cost. The family gathering that was supposed to celebrate gratitude had devolved into accusations and panic. I need time to process all this, I told Emma. I cannot just forgive and move forward immediately. I understand, she said quietly. For what? It is worth. I am truly sorry, Lydia. I failed as a friend when you needed me most. After hanging up, I paid my bill at the diner and left a generous tip, thanking the kind hostess for providing a peaceful Thanksgiving alternative. The sun was setting as I drove back to my hotel, casting long shadows across Westfield's town square. My phone continued to buzz with messages and calls, but I felt strangely detached from the urgency they represented. For months, I had been desperately seeking family approval and understanding. Now that the truth was known, now that the power dynamic had shifted, I found myself in no hurry to respond. Tonight, I would sleep on these developments. Tomorrow would be soon enough to decide how to proceed with the fragments of relationships that might be salvageable from this wreckage. The following morning, Black Friday, I awoke in my hotel room, feeling surprisingly rested despite the emotional turbulence of the previous day. Overnight, more messages had accumulated on my phone, but I set them aside temporarily in favor of a quiet breakfast at the hotel restaurant. As I sipped my coffee, I reviewed the events of the past 24 hours with greater clarity. The shock and hurt remained, but they no longer clouded my judgment. I understood now that what had happened was not a sudden holiday rejection, but the culmination of family dynamics that had existed for years beneath a veneer of harmony. After breakfast, I began sorting through messages, starting with one from Uncle Pete asking if we could meet. I called him and agreed to coffee at a local cafe at 10 o'clock. The cafe was quiet most of the town, either sleeping off Thanksgiving excess or participating in Black Friday shopping frenzies at the mall outside. Town. Uncle Pete was already waiting when I arrived, looking like he had aged 10 years overnight. Lydia, he said, standing to embrace me. Thank you for meeting me. We ordered coffee and sat at a corner table away from the few other patrons. I owe you an apology, he began immediately. I should have spoken up yesterday when your parents turned you away. I knew something was wrong about Heather's accusations, but I let myself be swayed by the conviction with which she presented her evidence. That is no excuse. You were the last person I expected to see at that table. I admitted that hurt more than almost anything else. He nodded, accepting the rebuke. I understand. My presence gave credibility to their actions. What happened after I left? After the emails, I asked. Uncle Pete provided a more detailed account than Emma had. After the initial shock of receiving Gregory's emails, the gathering had quickly divided into factions. My father had been primarily concerned with the financial implications of violating the secondary trust, while my mother had confronted Heather about the alleged letters. Heather eventually admitted she had fabricated them. Uncle Pete revealed she used Dorothy's stationery and practiced her handwriting. The doctor's note about cognitive decline was completely false. When pressed, she broke down and said she felt it was the only way to get what she deserved from the estate. And my parents? I asked. That was the worst part, he said, looking down. Once Heather admitted fabricating evidence, your mother was devastated. Your father, however, was more concerned about the lost trust money than about how they had treated you. They argued publicly, your mother saying they should immediately try to make amends with you, your father insisting they needed to consult lawyers first to see if the trust decision could be reversed. He described how the family gathering had completely disintegrated, with people taking sides and old grievances surfacing. Several relatives had left immediately, including Aunt Barbara, who had apparently told my sister she was a disgrace to the family name. Your parents ended up along with Heather. Uncle Pete concluded. Everyone else left. I drove around for hours, thinking about my own role in all this before finally going home and barely sleeping. I absorbed this information silently, trying to imagine the scene he described. Have you spoken with them today? I asked finally. I tried calling this morning. Your father did not answer. Your mother texted that they were dealing with the situation and would call people back when they could. I think they are in crisis mode. We talked for another hour. Uncle Pete filling in more family context and expressing genuine remorse for his failure to support me. Before we parted, he asked a question that caught me off guard. Do you think you can ever forgive them? Any of them? I considered this carefully before answering. Forgiveness might be possible eventually. Restoration of trust is a different matter. That would require genuine accountability and change, not just apologies motivated by financial loss. After leaving Uncle Pete, I drove to the cottage again, feeling drawn to the place that had become both sanctuary and catalyst. I spent the afternoon there, beginning the process of cleaning and airing out rooms that had been closed too long. The physical labor of opening windows, removing dust covers, and sweeping floors provided a meditative space to consider my next steps. At 4:30 in the afternoon, my phone rang with my mother's number. I answered after several rings. Lydia, her voice sounded small and uncertain. Are you still in town? Yes, I replied simply. Your father and I would like to see you to talk. Would you? Would it be possible for us to come to you, wherever you are comfortable meeting? The hesitancy in her voice, so different from her usual confidence, told me more about the situation than her words. I am at the cottage, I said. You can come here at 6 o'clock if that works. A pause. The cottage? Yes, that seems appropriate. We will be there at 6 o'clock. They arrived precisely on time. My father's inherent punctuality, apparently unaffected by the circumstances. I met them on the porch, not immediately inviting them inside what was now unquestionably my home. My mother looked as though she had been crying. My father's face was set in grim lines, his posture rigid. Neither spoke immediately, the three of us suspended in an uncomfortable tableau until I finally broke the silence. Would you like to come in? I have made some tea. They followed me into the living room where I had lit a fire in the stone fireplace and set out a tea service on the coffee table using Grandma's china cups. The domesticity of the setting contrasted sharply with the tension between us. Lydia, my mother, began after taking a seat on the edge of the sofa. What happened yesterday was unforgivable. I do not know if you can ever forgive us, but I need you to know I am deeply sorry. My father cleared his throat but said nothing, his eyes moving around the room as though seeing the cottage for the first time. Heather told us things, my mother continued when it became clear my father would not speak. She showed us letters that appeared to be from your grandmother describing pressure from you about the will. She had what looked like a medical assessment of your grandmother's cognitive state. We believed her because you always believe her, I finished quietly. Because Heather has always been the favorite, the one who could do no wrong. My mother flinched but did not deny it. We should... Have asked you directly? Should have questioned what we were being told? Yes, I agreed simply. You should have. My father finally spoke, his voice, lacking its usual authority, the secondary trust. Did you know about it before yesterday? No, I answered honestly. I had no idea Grandma had made those additional provisions. So you did not intentionally trigger the violation clause. He said something like relief crossing his face. Is that really your primary concern right now? I asked, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Not that you believed I would abuse an elderly woman. Not that you shut the door in my face on Thanksgiving. But whether I deliberately caused you to lose money, that is not what I meant, he backpedaled. It is just that the financial implications are significant. And if it was not intentional, perhaps there is a way to address the situation with the trustees. My mother shot him a look of disbelief. Richard, stop. This is exactly why we are in this situation. Money is not the point here. An uncomfortable silence fell. I poured tea and passed cups, the familiar ritual providing structure to an otherwise uncharted interaction. I need to understand something, I said finally. Even before Heather showed you these fabricated letters, you were both gradually taking her side in the inheritance dispute. Why? Why was it so hard to accept that Grandma chose to leave me the cottage? Because we shared a special connection. My parents exchanged glances. A lifetime of communication passing between them. It is complicated, my mother began. I think I deserve a straight answer, I interrupted. After everything that has happened, my father set down his teacup with a slight clatter. Your grandmother's decision felt like a criticism of how we had raised both of you, as though she was saying Heather was less deserving of inheritance because she followed the path we encouraged, while you who chose differently were rewarded. The honesty was startling. So this was about your egos, your need for validation of your parenting choices. That is not fair, my father started, but my mother placed a hand on his arm. No, she is right to ask, she said. And yes, Lydia, to some extent, it was about our egos, about our discomfort with your grandmother so obviously favoring you. We should have been happy that you had that special relationship, but instead we felt judged. The admission hung in the air between us. I had never expected such transparency, had prepared myself instead for denials and deflections. What happens now? I asked finally. That depends partly on you, my mother replied. We cannot undo what happened, but we would like to try to rebuild some kind of relationship if you are willing. And Heather, my father shifted uncomfortably. Heather is struggling right now. What she did was wrong, deeply wrong. But she is still our daughter. She needs professional help to deal with her issues around money and jealousy. I understand she is your daughter, I said carefully, but I need you to understand that I am too, and I will not subject myself to further abuse or manipulation. Even for the sake of family harmony, that is fair. My mother acknowledged. What do you need from us to begin moving forward? I had been considering this question since yesterday's revelation. First, complete transparency. No more secrets or conversations behind my back. Second, acknowledgement of the pattern of favoritism toward Heather. Not just in this situation, but throughout our lives. Third, family counseling if we are going to attempt to heal these relationships. And fourth, respect for my boundaries, including my decisions about the cottage. My parents absorbed these conditions silently. I could see my father wanting to negotiate to find easier terms, but something in my expression must have conveyed my resolve. Those are reasonable requests, my mother said finally. We have a lot of work to do as parents and as people. This will take time. I added trust once broken does not return overnight. I cannot promise forgiveness on any particular timeline. We understand, my mother assured me, though my father looked less certain. As they prepared to leave an hour later, My mother embraced me tentatively. My father stood awkwardly until I extended my hand, which he shook with uncharacteristic gentleness. "The cottage looks good with you in it," he said unexpectedly as they stepped onto the porch. "Your grandmother was right about that." It was not exactly an apology, but for my father, it was an extraordinary concession. I watched their car disappear down the cottage's long driveway, feeling neither triumph nor resolution, but something more complicated. The first fragile tendril of possibility emerging from the wreckage of what had been. 1 month later, 3 weeks before Christmas, my condo in Chicago was filled with the scent of pine from the modest tree I had decorated in the corner of my living room. The sound of laughter and conversation drifted from the dining area, where I had set up a buffet dinner for what I now considered my chosen family. Uncle Pete and his wife Linda were deep in conversation with my colleague Jordan from the architecture firm. My 2 closest friends from Chicago, Amelia and Marcus, were helping distribute drinks. Gregory and his husband Daniel had brought their famous chocolate pecan pie. In the kitchen, my neighbor Mrs. Abernethy, an 80-year-old widow who had become a surrogate grandmother figure, was arranging her homemade cookies on a platter. Most surprisingly, 2 couples I had met at the Silver Spoon Diner on Thanksgiving had accepted my invitation. The truck driver, Frank, and his wife had driven from Ohio. The young backpacking couple, Zoe and Tyler, had rerouted their travel. Plans to stop in Chicago. "This is what holidays should be," Amelia commented, joining me by the window where I had stepped away briefly to observe the gathering. "People who genuinely want to be together," I nodded, taking a sip of mulled wine. "It is different from what I imagined my life would look like, but better in many ways." The past month had been transformative. After the confrontation with my parents at the cottage, I had returned to Chicago with a new perspective on family belonging and self-worth. The initial shock and hurt had gradually given way to a clarity I had never before experienced. My parents had called weekly since Thanksgiving, our conversations initially awkward but increasingly genuine. They had followed through on my conditions, beginning family counseling sessions, which they attended without Heather, who had so far refused to participate. My mother had sent a handwritten letter acknowledging specific instances of favoritism throughout my childhood and apologizing for each one. My father had been less forthcoming, but was making visible efforts to change lifelong patterns. The secondary trust issue remained unresolved. Gregory had explained that reversing the violation provisions would require legal proceedings and was unlikely to succeed given the clear documentation of Grandma Dorothy's intentions. My parents had ultimately decided not to pursue litigation, accepting the financial consequences of their actions as part of the accountability process. Heather and I had not spoken directly. According to my parents, she had moved temporarily to stay with a friend in Detroit, taking a leave of absence from her medical practice. She had sent one brief email that read, more like a legal statement than a personal communication. I acknowledge fabricating documents regarding our grandmother's state of mind and wishes. This action was legally and morally wrong. I am seeking professional help to address the underlying issues. Emma had made multiple attempts at reconciliation, sending thoughtful messages, flowers, and finally a lengthy handwritten letter examining her role in enabling Heather's manipulation and her failure as a friend. I had responded briefly, but remained guarded, uncertain whether our friendship could or should be salvaged. The cottage had become a weekend sanctuary. I had hired local contractors to begin careful restoration work, honoring the original architectural details while updating systems for modern efficiency. Uncle Pete had volunteered his expertise driving from Westfield to Chicago several times to review plans and offer suggestions. Most surprisingly, I had connected with the local historical preservation society that Grandma had mentioned in her trust documents. They were thrilled about my commitment to maintaining the cottage's architectural integrity and had begun the process of designating it as a heritage property. This would provide tax benefits and ensure its protection long after I was gone, exactly as Grandma had hoped. "Penny, for your thoughts," Uncle Pete said, joining Amelia and me by the window. "Just reflecting on how much has changed since Thanksgiving," I replied. "I never would have predicted any of this." "Your grandmother would be proud," he said, not for the first time. "Not just of how you handled the cottage, but of how you handled yourself through all of this with dignity and strength." The gathering continued into the evening conversation, flowing easily among people who had been strangers a month ago, but now shared the bond of having supported me through transformation. As dessert was served, my phone chimed with a text message. From my mother, "Thinking of you tonight. Your father and I are continuing our work in counseling. The house feels empty without your laughter. When you are ready, we would love to see you. No pressure, just love." It was the first time she had used the word love in a message since before Thanksgiving. I showed the text to Uncle Pete, who nodded approvingly. "Small steps," he commented, but genuine ones, I think. As the evening wound down and guests began departing with warm hugs and promises to gather again soon, I found myself standing alone in my living room, looking at the Christmas tree lights reflecting in the window against the Chicago night skyline beyond. The path forward was not entirely clear, nor would it be easy. Healing family relationships would require sustained effort from all sides with no guarantee of success. Heather might never acknowledge the deeper issues behind her actions. My parents might revert to old patterns despite current good intentions. Trust would need to be rebuilt slowly, brick by painful brick. Yet, for the first time since Grandma Dorothy's passing, I felt genuinely at peace with my place in the world. The rejection at my parents' door on Thanksgiving, painful as it had been, had forced me to confront illusions about family that had constrained me for years. In losing what I thought was essential, I had discovered a capacity for creating meaningful connection on my own terms. The cottage stood as a symbol of this transformation, not merely a piece of property to be possessed or disputed, but a physical manifestation of legacy, continuity, and chosen responsibility. In honoring my grandmother's wish that I preserve something valuable from the past, I had inadvertently created space for a different future than I had imagined. As I turned off lights and prepared for bed that night, I realized that the story of Thanksgiving rejection was no longer the defining narrative of my life. It had become instead the catalyst for a deeper understanding of belonging, worthiness, and the family we create through conscious choice rather than merely through blood. Have you ever experienced a painful rejection that eventually led to unexpected growth? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes our most difficult moments become the foundation for our greatest transformations. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that family can be what we create, not just what we are born into. Thank you for being part of this journey with me. And remember that sometimes the best Thanksgivings are the ones that look nothing like we expected.